I still remember the day I collapsed in my college dorm from unbearable pain. My roommate rushed me to the emergency room where doctors discovered I needed immediate surgery, a procedure my insurance wouldn't fully cover. When I called my parents, begging for help with the $8,000 medical bill, they told me to figure it out and take out a loan. 3 days later, my sister posted photos from her 2-week European vacation, paid for by our parents as her graduation gift. I never imagined that decision would change everything when, years later, they showed up at my doorstep desperately needing my help. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel Winters, and by 21, I'd learned a painful lesson about family that most people don't discover until much later in life. Blood relations don't guarantee unconditional support. It started during my junior year at Westlake University. I'd been experiencing intermittent abdominal pain for months, but between maintaining my scholarship, working part-time at the campus bookstore, and trying to have some semblance of a social life, I'd pushed it aside. Probably just stress, I told myself, popping another over-the-counter painkiller and heading to my advanced economics lecture. Until one Tuesday morning, when the pain became impossible to ignore. "Rachel! Rachel!" My roommate Zoe's voice seemed to come from far away as I curled into a ball on my dorm room floor, my vision blurring from the intensity of the pain radiating through my abdomen. The next few hours passed in fragments of consciousness, Zoe helping me to her car, the fluorescent lights of the emergency room, a doctor's concerned face hovering above mine. "Severe endometriosis," the doctor explained when the pain medication finally kicked in enough for me to focus. "It's progressed significantly. You'll need laparoscopic surgery to remove the tissue and prevent further damage. Without it, you're looking at potential fertility issues and chronic pain that will likely worsen." I nodded numbly, trying to process what this meant beyond the medical terminology. Surgery, recovery time. And then the question that made my stomach clench with a different kind of pain. "Do you have insurance?" the hospital administrator asked, clipboard in hand. I did, a basic student policy that came with my scholarship. But as the administrator explained in sympathetic but firm tones, it would only cover about 60% of the procedure. The remaining $8,000 would be my responsibility. $8,000. It might as well have been $8 million. My part-time job barely covered my daily expenses after tuition, books, and the portion of room and board my scholarship didn't include. I had exactly $432.17 in my savings account, money I'd been setting aside penny by penny for an apartment after graduation. "I'll need to call my parents," I said, reaching for my phone with trembling hands. The Winters family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. My father, Daniel, worked as a regional manager for a chain of hardware stores, a position that had moved us 3 times during my childhood, but provided a stable, comfortable income. My mother, Grace, ran a small interior design business from home. Our 2-story house in the suburbs of Minneapolis had a manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, and a living room that my mother redecorated every few years when she grew tired of the current aesthetic. They could help. They would help. This was an emergency, after all. I dialed home, wincing as I shifted position in the hospital bed. My mother answered on the 4th ring. "Hello?" Her voice carried the distracted tone I recognized. She was working on something and hadn't checked caller ID. "Mom, it's Rachel. I'm in the hospital." The words caught in my throat. "Hospital? What happened? Are you all right?" The distraction vanished, replaced by alarm. I explained the situation as clearly as I could: the diagnosis, the needed surgery, the insurance shortfall. The pain medication made it hard to organize my thoughts, but I managed to convey the essentials. $8,000? My mother's voice had changed again, a coolness entering it. "That's an enormous amount, Rachel." "I know, Mom. I wouldn't..." Ask if I had any other option. The doctor says this can't wait. Your father and I need to discuss this. I'll call you back. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, telling myself that of course they needed to talk it over. $8,000 wasn't a small amount. They'd call back soon with a plan. 3 hours later, my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. Rachel. His voice was firm, the same tone he used when delivering final verdicts on everything from curfew appeals to college applications. Your mother told me about your situation. Dad, Let me finish. We've discussed this, and we think the responsible thing is for you to handle this yourself. You're an adult now, in your 3rd year of college. Part of becoming independent is managing your own problems. I felt like I'd been slapped. Dad, this isn't like asking for money for spring break or a new laptop. This is surgery, medical necessity. And there are options available to you. The hospital will have payment plans. There are student emergency loans. You could pick up more hours at work once you've recovered. But recovery will take weeks, and I'll miss work, and… Rachel. His tone sharpened. This is our decision. You're studying business, aren't you? Consider it a real-world lesson in financial management. A lesson, my health, my future fertility, my chronic pain, reduced to a lesson in financial management. Your sister managed her appendectomy bills when she was at college, he continued. This wasn't true. When my older sister Vanessa had her appendix removed during her sophomore year, my parents had paid the entire bill without hesitation. They'd even flown out to stay with her for a week during her recovery. But pointing this out would only entrench my father's position. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not at all. Good. Keep us updated on your recovery. We love you. The call ended, and I lay there staring at the institutional ceiling tiles, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My parents had refused to help me, their daughter, with emergency surgery. What did that mean about our relationship? About my place in our family? I didn't have much time to ponder these questions. The hospital needed decisions. With few options, I signed up for their highest interest payment plan and scheduled the surgery for the following morning. Zoe promised to take notes in our shared classes and help me get back to the dorm afterward. My parents can't help financially, I explained, the words bitter on my tongue. Zoe's expression said everything she was too kind to verbalize. We both knew what it meant when parents who could help chose not to. The surgery went as well as could be expected. The doctor removed extensive endometrial tissue, taking pictures to show me the angry red patches that had been causing my pain. Recovery was difficult, both physically and emotionally. I returned to the dorm after 2 days in the hospital, moving carefully between bed and bathroom, swallowing pain medication that made me foggy but couldn't completely eliminate the ache. My mother called daily, asking about my recovery, but never mentioning the financial situation. My father texted awkward get-well messages. I responded politely, maintaining the facade that everything was normal, that their decision hadn't fundamentally altered how I saw our family. Then, 3 days after my surgery, while I was propped up in bed trying to focus on a textbook through a haze of pain medication, my phone pinged with a social media notification. Vanessa Winters has added 43 new photos to the album Italian. Dreams! I shouldn't have looked. I knew it would only hurt. But my thumb seemed to move of its own accord, opening the app to display my sister's smiling face against the backdrop of the Trevi fountain. Beautiful Vanessa, golden-haired and confident, posing in designer sunglasses. The caption read, "First stop on my 2-week European graduation tour. Thanks Mom and Dad for the best gift ever. Blessed Dr. European, summer dreams documa true." I scrolled. Through photo after photo, Vanessa at elegant restaurants, in front of historic landmarks, shopping in high-end districts. The final blow came in the comments section where my mother had written, Nothing but the best for our amazing daughter. Enjoy every minute, sweetie. We're so proud of you." The room seemed to tilt around me. My parents couldn't help with my medical emergency, a situation that affected my health, my future, my daily existence, but they could fund Vanessa's luxury European vacation? A graduation gift that must have cost far more than the $8,000 I had needed? I closed the app and placed my phone face down on the bedside table. Then, carefully mindful of my stitches, I curled onto my side and allowed myself to cry. Not just from the physical pain, but from the dawning realization that in my family's hierarchy of priorities, I existed somewhere below my sister's desire for Instagram-worthy vacation photos. That night, something crystallized within me. As I lay in my dorm room, calculating how long it would take to pay off my medical debt on my part-time bookstore salary, I made a decision. I would never again expect or request my parents' support. I would build my life on the assumption that I was entirely on my own. And most importantly, I would never forget this lesson about where I stood in my family's eyes. I didn't know then how this resolution would be tested years later, or how the seeds of self-reliance planted in that painful moment would grow into a strength that would ultimately save me. And ironically, become the very thing my family would desperately need. The next few months were a masterclass in resilience. I developed a routine that would have impressed even the most dedicated efficiency expert. Classes in the morning, work at the bookstore until closing, homework until my eyes couldn't focus, then collapse into bed only to start again the next day. The hospital payment plan took $320 from my monthly income, leaving me with just enough for essentials if I budgeted carefully. "You're going to burn out," Zoe warned one night, finding me hunched over my laptop at 2 a.m., my third cup of coffee growing cold beside me. "I don't have a choice," I replied without looking up. "The economics midterm won't pass itself, and neither will my medical bills." What I didn't tell her was that beneath the exhaustion and financial stress, I'd found something unexpected. Fierce pride in managing on my own. Each payment I made toward my medical debt felt like a declaration of independence. Each excellent grade earned despite overwhelming circumstances felt like a promise to my future self. My parents called less frequently as the weeks passed. Our conversations became superficial exchanges, weather, classes, bland updates with no emotional depth. I never mentioned my financial struggles or the toll recovery was taking. They never asked. Vanessa, meanwhile, continued her highlight reel on social media. After her European adventure, she secured an entry-level marketing position at a cosmetics company in Chicago, an opportunity that came with a modest salary but impressive title. Within months, she was somehow living in a sleek downtown apartment, wearing designer clothes, and brunching at trendy restaurants every weekend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The math didn't add up, but I had my suspicions, confirmed during a rare phone call with my mother. "Your sister is doing so well," Mom gushed. "Her apartment is in the perfect location, though the rent is steep. Your father and I help a little each month, just until she gets that promotion she's up for." I bit back the words that threatened to escape. A little help with Chicago downtown rent wasn't little at all. But I'd learned that pointing out the disparity in how they treated us would only lead to defensive explanations about how different our situations were, how Vanessa needed more support for her career path. "That's nice," I said instead, changing the subject. By senior year, I'd developed a reputation among professors and peers. Rachel Winters, the serious one, always prepared, always professional, never at parties, never wasting time. Some found it admirable, others concerning. A few probably thought it boring. I didn't care. I was building something more important than a social life. I was building self-sufficiency. Professor Harmon, my advanced financial analysis instructor, called me to his office after class one December afternoon. "You're my top student," he said without preamble, "but I'm concerned about your single-minded focus. There's determination, and then there's what you're doing." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "I'm just dedicated to my education." He leaned back, regarding me with eyes that had spent decades observing students. "Rachel, I've watched you for 2 years now. You're not just dedicated, you're driven by something beyond academic achievement. I recognize it because I've seen it before. Something happened that made you decide you could only rely on yourself." The accuracy of his assessment made my chest tighten. No one had seen through my careful facade before. "With your permission," he continued, "I'd like to recommend you for the Blackwell Fellowship at Meridian Financial. It's highly competitive. Only 2 students nationwide are selected each year, but it would provide full-time employment after graduation with exceptional compensation and advancement opportunities." The Blackwell Fellowship. Even I, isolated as I'd become, knew its reputation. It was the golden ticket in financial services, the kind of opportunity that launched careers into the stratosphere. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "There must be students with better connections, more extracurriculars." "The Blackwell doesn't care about family connections or who plays the most varsity sports," Professor Harmon interrupted. "They want raw talent, work ethic, and resilience. You have all 3 in abundance." For the first time in over a year, I felt something crack in the armor I'd built around myself, a small fissure through which hope seeped in. The application process was grueling. 6 rounds of interviews, complex case studies, psychological assessments, and background checks. Throughout it all, I told no one except Zoe. Not my classmates, not my coworkers, and certainly not my family. I couldn't bear their reaction if I failed, and strangely, I dreaded their response if I succeeded. 3 weeks before graduation, I received the email. "Dear Ms. Winters, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of 2 Blackwell Fellows for the upcoming year." What followed was a detailed outline of my compensation package, a starting salary that made me blink repeatedly to ensure I was seeing the numbers correctly, along with benefits, relocation assistance to New York City, and a signing bonus that would eliminate my remaining medical debt in one stroke. I sat on my dorm bed, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. Not just because of the opportunity itself, but because I had done this. Me. Without family connections, without financial support, without anyone clearing the path ahead. I had clawed my way here through determination and work, transforming pain into purpose. My first call was to Zoe, who screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. My second was to Professor Harmon, whose normally stoic demeanor cracked into a rare smile. "They made the right choice," he said simply. The question of telling my parents lingered. Part of me wanted to maintain my independence completely, to move to New York and begin my new life without them knowing the details. But that felt childish, a reaction rather than a decision. So I called, catching them during Sunday dinner. "I've accepted a position after graduation," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The Blackwell Fellowship at Meridian Financial in New York." Silence on the other end. Then my father. "New York? That's very far, Rachel." "It's a significant opportunity," I continued. "Only 2 are awarded nationally each year." "Wow, that sounds impressive," my mother said, her voice brightening. "Will you have a nice apartment? New York is so expensive." Of course, that would be her first concern. Appearances, lifestyle, status markers, not the achievement itself, not the work it had taken to get here. "The compensation is excellent," I said, not elaborating. "I'll be fine." "You'll have to explain to us what exactly this fellowship involves," my father said. "Financial services is so complicated. Not like Vanessa's marketing job, Everyone understands what she does. There it was, the comparison, the subtle diminishment. Some things never changed. Speaking of your sister, my mother interjected, she's having a housewarming party next month for her new condo. We're all expected to attend, of course. New condo. At 24, with a junior marketing salary. The implications were clear. I'll be preparing for my move to New York, I said. Send her my regrets. After graduation, I allowed myself 1 week of rest, the first true break I'd had in nearly 2 years. Then I packed my modest belongings, said a tearful goodbye to Zoe, and boarded a plane to New York City. The Blackwell Fellowship exceeded even my highest expectations. The work was challenging and fulfilling, my colleagues brilliant and driven. My mentor, Diana Chen, no relation, was a former fellow who had risen to become Meridian's youngest ever vice president of investment strategy. The first year is about learning, Diana told me during our initial meeting. The second is about contributing. The third is about distinguishing yourself. After that, your path is what you make it. I absorbed everything like a sponge: financial models, client psychology, market analysis, corporate strategy. I worked long hours not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time, my intensity felt channeled toward creation, rather than survival. My studio apartment in Brooklyn was small, but mine alone. No roommates, no compromises. I furnished it simply but tastefully, each piece selected with care. After years of deprivation, I allowed myself small luxuries: quality, coffee beans, a weekend yoga class, occasional dinners at neighborhood restaurants. But old habits remained. I saved aggressively, lived well below my means, and built an emergency fund that would have impressed even the most conservative financial advisor. Communication with my family dwindled further. Monthly calls became quarterly. Holiday visits were brief and perfunctory. Vanessa's social media continued to showcase an increasingly lavish lifestyle: exotic vacations, luxury purchases, exclusive events, while her LinkedIn profile showed only modest career advancement. During a rare Thanksgiving visit home, 2 years after graduation, I overheard my parents discussing finances in hushed tones in the kitchen. "We can't keep doing this," my father was saying. Between the mortgage, our expenses, and helping Vanessa with her condo payments. "She needs our support," my mother insisted. "You know how important appearances are in her industry. She can't network effectively without the right address, the right clothes. But our retirement accounts, we'll be fine. The market will bounce back. It always does." I stepped away quietly, pieces clicking into place. My parents weren't just helping Vanessa with a little rent. They were significantly subsidizing her lifestyle, possibly at the expense of their own financial security. The contrast with their approach to my medical emergency was stark and revealing. That night, as I prepared for bed in my childhood room, now redecorated as a guest room that happened to still house my old belongings, I made another decision. I would build my financial future with the assumption that I might someday need to support not just myself but my parents as well. Not because they deserved it after their treatment of me, but because I refused to replicate their pattern of selective support. I would be better than what had been shown to me. The next morning, I increased my automatic savings contributions by 10% and set up a separate investment account labeled simply Family Contingency. Not out of obligation, but as insurance against future complications I could already see forming on the horizon. Complications that would arrive sooner than any of us could have anticipated. 4 years into my career at Meridian Financial, life had taken on a rhythm I'd never imagined possible during those painful college days. I'd advanced from Blackwell Fellow to Associate Portfolio Manager, then to Senior Analyst in record time. My reputation for meticulous research and unflappable client management had earned me a corner office with a sliver of Manhattan skyline visible through the window, a view I often admired during late nights at the office. "You're being considered For the Hong Kong assignment, Diana mentioned casually one evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. 3 years heading up our Asia-Pacific Emerging Markets division. It would fast-track you for the executive team when you return. I looked up from my spreadsheets, momentarily speechless. The Hong Kong position was typically reserved for those with at least a decade of experience, not 30-year-olds barely 4 years into their careers. The board is impressed with how you handled the Sakamoto account, Diana continued. Not. Many people could have salvaged that relationship after the market correction. You didn't just retain their business, you increased their investment by 40%. Pride warmed my chest. The Sakamoto rescue had required 3 sleepless nights, a crash course in Japanese business etiquette, and intuitive financial modeling that even surprised me. But I'd done it entirely on my own terms, without compromising my ethics or analysis. When would they decide? I asked, already mentally calculating what a move to Hong Kong would entail. Next month. But Rachel, Diana's expression grew serious. This is more than a career opportunity. It's a life decision. 3 years abroad means putting down roots here on hold, relationships, community, family connections. Some find that trade-off harder than expected. Family connections. The phrase hung in the air between us. Diana knew the broad strokes. Of my family situation, I'd shared enough during late-night work sessions for her to understand why I never rushed home for holidays or displayed family photos on my desk. I don't have many ties holding me here, I said simply. Later that night in my Brooklyn apartment, recently upgraded to a 1-bedroom with a small terrace, I found myself scrolling through my phone's contact list. My finger hovered over my parents' number. When was the last time we'd spoken? 2 months ago? 3? The conversation had been predictably superficial. Whether in Minneapolis, my father's golf game, vague mentions of doing well at work without any specific details, shared or requested. On impulse, I pressed the call button. My mother answered on the 5th ring, her voice carrying the artificial brightness I'd grown to recognize as her public-facing tone. Rachel, what a surprise! Is everything okay? The implication being that I only called when something was wrong, not entirely unfair given our history. Everything's fine, Mom. I just wanted to update you on something. I'm being considered for an international assignment, Hong Kong, for 3 years. It would be a significant career advancement. Hong Kong? Her voice carried genuine surprise. That's so far away. It's a global economy, I replied, immediately regretting the professorial tone. The experience would be invaluable. I'm sure it would be. A pause. Your father will want to hear this. Let me get him. I heard muffled conversation. Then, my father's deeper voice. Rachel, your mother says you're moving to China? Hong Kong, I corrected. And it's not definite yet. I'm being considered for the position. That's certainly ambitious, he said, sounding unsure whether this was good news. Would it be safe, with the political situation there? A legitimate concern, but not what I'd expected as his first reaction. Meridian has comprehensive security protocols for expatriate employees. I'd be fine. Well, it's a big decision, he said, his tone suggesting he thought it might be too big for me, despite my stellar career track record and financial independence. It is, I agreed, but a tremendous opportunity. Another pause, then. Your sister just got engaged, did she tell you? The abrupt subject change was jarring, but typical. Any focus on my achievements quickly redirected to Vanessa. No, she didn't. That's wonderful. To Bradley Thornton, the real estate developer? His family owns half the luxury properties in Chicago's Gold Coast. The ring is spectacular, 3 carats at least. Of course it was. Please give her my congratulations. You'll need to come home for the engagement party next month. Your mother's already planning everything. The Thorntons are very prominent socially, so it needs to be perfect. I closed my eyes, centering myself. I'm not sure I can get away. We're in the middle of a critical— Rachel, my father interrupted, his voice taking on the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. This is your sister's engagement. Family comes first. Family comes first. The irony was so profound I nearly laughed. Where was family first when I was in a hospital bed needing surgery? Where was it during my recovery, or throughout my college years as I worked double shifts to pay off medical debt while they funded Vanessa's European vacation? I'll check my calendar, I said neutrally, unwilling to create conflict but equally unwilling to commit. Good. Your mother will send the details. The Thorntons are flying in from their summer home in Nantucket specially for this. After ending the call, I sat on my terrace overlooking the Brooklyn streetscape, watching the interplay of shadows and light as the sun set behind Manhattan's silhouette. The contrast between my parents' tepid reaction to my potential career leap and their excitement over Vanessa's engagement to wealth was predictable, yet still somehow disappointing. I opened my laptop and navigated to my banking portal, checking the family contingency account I'd established years earlier. The balance had grown substantially, a financial fortress built from discipline, foresight, and perhaps a touch of paranoia. Seeing those numbers brought a complicated comfort. I was prepared for whatever might come, even if I couldn't precisely name what I was preparing for. 3 weeks later, I received 2 significant communications within hours of each other. The first was an email from Meridian's executive committee, officially offering me the Hong Kong position with a compensation package that made my breath catch. The second was a text from my mother with an image attachment, an elaborate invitation to celebrate the engagement of Vanessa Winters and Bradley Thornton III at the Minneapolis Country Club. The date of the engagement party conflicted directly with the international transition orientation I would need to attend if I accepted the Hong Kong role. It felt like the universe presenting a perfect metaphor for the choice I'd been making for years: my carefully constructed, independent life versus the family dynamic that had shaped yet ultimately dismissed me. The path forward seemed clear. I composed my acceptance of the Hong Kong position, scheduling the email to send first thing in the morning after I'd reviewed the contract details one final time. Then I crafted a polite, professional message to my mother, expressing regrets that I couldn't attend the engagement celebration due to prior professional commitments, along with warm wishes for the couple. Just as I was about to power down, my phone rang, Vanessa's name appearing on the screen. We hadn't spoken directly in over a year. "Rachel," she said when I answered, her voice carrying the slight vocal fry she'd developed in college. "Mom says you're not coming to my engagement party?" "I have a work conflict I can't move," I explained, keeping my tone pleasant. "But congratulations on your engagement. Bradley sounds wonderful." "You can't get out of it? This is kind of important, Rach." The childhood nickname felt manipulative rather than affectionate. "Unfortunately not. It's a critical meeting for an international position." "Wait!" Her tone shifted from annoyed to intrigued. "Are you getting, promoted or something?" The question revealed how little my family knew about my professional life. "Something like that. I'm being moved to Hong Kong to head up the Asia-Pacific division." A long pause. "Wow, that's actually impressive." She sounded genuinely surprised, which was both validating and insulting. "Does it come with a big raise?" Of course that would be her first question. "The compensation is appropriate for the responsibility," I said diplomatically. "So that's a yes." Another pause. "Look, about the engagement party. I really need you there. Bradley's whole family is coming, and they're very traditional about family stuff. It would look weird if my only sister wasn't there. Appearances again. Always appearances." "I understand it's disappointing," I said, "but this timing is beyond my control. Could you at least send a really nice gift? Something that makes a statement?" Bradley's sister got us crystal from Tiffany. The request was so perfectly Vanessa, transactional, status-conscious, and assumption-laden about my willingness to spend significantly to maintain her image. "I'll find something appropriate," I promised vaguely. After we hung up, I sat with the complex emotions our conversation had stirred. There was the familiar disappointment, yes, but also a surprising lack of resentment. I recognized Vanessa's behavior patterns for what they were, products of the family dynamic our parents had created, where her worth was consistently affirmed while mine was questioned, where her needs were prioritized while mine were minimized. The realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. I didn't need to resent my sister or even my parents. I simply needed to continue building a life aligned with my own values rather than reacting to theirs. The next morning, I sent my acceptance of the Hong Kong position and ordered a moderately expensive but thoughtful engagement gift. Not the statement piece Vanessa had hoped for, but not an insult either. Then I began the exhilarating process of preparing for the biggest adventure of my professional life. The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of activity, transitioning my current portfolio to colleagues, securing an apartment in Hong Kong's mid-levels district through Meridian's relocation service, obtaining necessary visas and permits, and studying Cantonese basics through an intensive online program. I was so immersed in preparations that I nearly missed the series of missed calls from my father one Tuesday afternoon. When I finally returned his call during a brief lunch break, the strain in his voice immediately put me on alert. "Dad, is everything okay?" A heavy sigh. "Not really, no. There's been an incident with your sister." Cold dread pooled in my stomach. "Is she hurt?" "Not physically, no." He lowered his voice, though I could tell he'd moved somewhere private to make this call. "It's Bradley. He's called off the engagement." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely meaning it despite my complicated feelings about Vanessa. Heartbreak was heartbreak, regardless of circumstances. "It's complicated," my father continued. "Bradley hired a financial investigator before finalizing the prenup. Apparently, it's standard procedure in his family." My professional instincts awakened. "And?" "The investigator found something. Your sister has been—" He struggled for words. "Misrepresenting her financial situation. Significantly." Translation: Vanessa had been living far beyond her means, likely accumulating substantial debt while presenting an image of successful independence. "How bad is it?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Bad." His voice dropped further. "Credit card debt, personal loans, even some questionable accounting at her job." The Thorntons withdrew immediately. Bradley's father threatened to report certain findings to her employer. I closed my eyes, imagining the implosion of Vanessa's carefully constructed facade. "Does Mom know?" "Yes, she's devastated. We both are." "But Rachel?" He hesitated. "There's more. Your sister's been staying with us since it happened, and going through her finances, we've discovered that your mother and I are— well, we're entangled in some of her financial arrangements." "Entangled how?" I asked, though I already had suspicions. "Co-signed loans mainly, and some of our credit cards were apparently utilized without our full knowledge." The picture was becoming clearer. My parents had not only subsidized Vanessa's lifestyle but had become financially enmeshed with her beyond their intentions. Now that her house of cards was collapsing, they were at risk of being pulled down with her. "I see," I said carefully. "What are you planning to do?" Another heavy sigh. "That's partly why I'm calling. Your mother thought, since you work in finance, you might have some insights on how to handle this situation, maybe advice on debt consolidation or whatever they call it." Not an outright request for money, not yet, but the groundwork was being laid. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of minimal interest in my financial expertise, they were now seeking it when crisis struck. I'd need to understand the full picture, I said, keeping my tone professional rather than emotional. Exact amounts, interest rates, terms, all of it. Of course, your mother has been trying to organize everything. It's a bit overwhelming. I glanced at my watch. Hong Kong preparations were consuming every spare moment, but this situation wouldn't resolve itself. I can make time for a video call this weekend to go through it all. But Dad, I added, I'm still proceeding with the Hong Kong move. It's happening in 3 weeks. Oh. He sounded disappointed, as though he'd expected me to abandon my plans in light of this family crisis. Right. Well, the weekend call would be appreciated. As I ended the conversation and returned to my desk, a strange calm settled over me. For years, I'd been preparing for some version of this scenario, building resources, developing expertise, creating contingencies. Not out of cynicism, but out of a clear-eyed assessment of the patterns around me. What I hadn't anticipated was how I would feel when it finally arrived. Not vindicated, not resentful, just ready. Ready to help on my own terms, from a position of strength rather than obligation. I opened my calendar and blocked out time for the weekend call, then returned to my Hong Kong preparations. A new chapter of my life was about to begin, one that would include addressing my family's crisis, but would not be defined by it. The weekend video call with my parents was more revealing than I'd anticipated. What began as a discussion about Vanessa's financial situation quickly expanded into a comprehensive picture of my family's entire economic reality, and it was alarming. My mother had prepared what she considered organized financial documents, a chaotic collection of statements, bills, and handwritten notes spread across their dining room table. My father sat beside her, looking smaller somehow, the confident, authority figure of my childhood diminished by spreadsheets he couldn't comprehend. Let's start with the basics, I said, maintaining the professional demeanor I used with anxious clients. What's the total household income right now? The numbers they shared were concerning. My father's hardware chain had been struggling against big-box competitors, resulting in reduced bonuses and a salary freeze. My mother's interior design business had lost clients to younger designers with stronger social media presences. Their combined income had decreased by nearly 30% over the past 3 years, yet their spending hadn't adjusted accordingly. And what about fixed expenses? Mortgage, utilities, insurance? More troubling figures emerged. They'd refinanced the house twice in recent years, extracting equity each time. The current mortgage payment was nearly double what it had been when I lived at home, with 25 years remaining on the term, taking my father well past any reasonable retirement age. What were the cash-out refinances for? I asked, though I suspected the answer. My mother glanced away from the camera. Various things. Home improvements, helping Vanessa with her condo down payment, a few investments that Craig was sure would pay off quickly. Investment was a generous term for what appeared to be speculative ventures my father had been enticed into. Restaurant partnerships, cryptocurrency schemes, and real estate developments in oversaturated markets. None had provided returns. Most had resulted in complete losses. Let's talk about Vanessa's situation specifically, I redirected, noting my father's increasing discomfort with the spotlight on his financial missteps. The picture that emerged was staggering. Vanessa's apparent affluence had been built on a foundation of revolving credit card debt across 12 different cards, personal loans from predatory lenders, and a lease-to-own arrangement on her luxury condo that included balloon payments she had no hope of making. Her total debt approached $220,000, nearly 4 times her annual salary. "And you co-signed for the condo arrangement?" I confirmed, struggling to keep judgment from my voice. "She said it was the only way to secure the property in that neighborhood," my mother explained defensively. The real estate market was moving so quickly, and she needed to establish herself properly. The entanglement went deeper. My parents had co-signed 3 personal loans totaling $65,000. They'd added Vanessa as an authorized user on their credit cards, which she had maximized without their explicit permission. They'd even taken a second mortgage on their home to invest in a cosmetic startup that Vanessa claimed would give her insider access to industry connections. "I think I have enough to start with," I said, my mind already calculating scenarios and options. "I'll need a few days to analyze everything and develop some recommendations. But what do we do about the creditors calling right now?" my mother asked anxiously. "And the missed payment notices? For immediate relief, stop answering calls from numbers you don't recognize. Don't make any promises to creditors until we have a comprehensive plan. And absolutely no new loans or credit applications," I instructed firmly. After ending the call, I sat in my half-packed Brooklyn apartment surrounded by the evidence of my careful, measured life, a life built on planning, discipline, and foresight, rather than appearances and immediate gratification. The contrast between my financial reality and my family's couldn't have been starker. I spent the next 72 hours creating a complete financial assessment of my family's situation, working through nights after finishing my Hong Kong preparations during the day. The comprehensive picture was even worse than the initial overview suggested. My parents were technically insolvent when Vanessa's co-signed debts were factored in. Their retirement accounts had been depleted through hardship withdrawals and loans. Their home equity was largely gone. At their ages, early 60s, the road to recovery would be long and difficult. When I called them back, I had prepared 3 potential strategies, each with detailed projections, timelines, and requirements. "I've developed some options," I began, screen sharing my analysis. "I'll walk you through each one." I outlined the first scenario, a disciplined 5-year debt management plan involving significant lifestyle reduction, potential downsizing of their home, structured repayment agreements with creditors, and no additional financial support for Vanessa beyond helping her find credit counseling services. My mother's expression tightened. "That seems very severe." "It's mathematically sound," I replied evenly. "It would require sacrifice but would eventually restore financial stability." The second scenario involved bankruptcy protection, a more drastic but potentially cleaner option given their circumstances. I explained the implications for their credit, assets, and future. My father shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. The shame alone. Everyone in our community would—" "No," I nodded, understanding that the social implications weighed as heavily as the financial ones. "Then let me present the third option." This final scenario was the one I'd struggled with most while developing it. It involved my direct intervention, using a portion of my family contingency fund to resolve the most predatory debts immediately, consolidate the remainder at lower interest rates, and establish a structured support system with clear conditions and accountability measures. My parents leaned forward as I outlined this approach, their expressions shifting from despair to tentative hope. "You would do that?" my father asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "After everything?" The unstated acknowledgement of their past treatment hung in the digital space between us. It was the closest he'd ever come to recognizing the disparity in how they'd supported, or failed to support, their daughters. "I would consider it," I said carefully. "But this wouldn't be a blank check. There would be conditions." I displayed the next slide of my presentation, a detailed list of requirements. 1. Complete financial transparency. All accounts, statements, and transactions shared monthly. 2. Adherence to a strict budget I would develop and monitor. Financial. Counseling sessions, which I would arrange and fund. 4. No new debt without prior discussion and approval. 5. Reasonable support for Vanessa's basic needs, but no enabling of continued financial irresponsibility. 6. Regular accountability check-ins. To review progress and adjust strategies. This would be a partnership, I explained. Not a rescue with no strings attached. The goal would be to stabilize your situation now while building sustainable financial habits for the future. My mother's expression was complex. Gratitude mingled with what appeared to be surprise at my capabilities, perhaps even a hint of embarrassment that her younger daughter was in a position to solve problems she and my father couldn't manage. "This is impressive, Rachel," she said finally. "You've clearly learned so much in your career." An insufficient acknowledgement of what this moment represented, but I accepted it with a nod. "We'd need some time to discuss this," my father said, his pride still wrestling with the reality of needing his daughter's help. "It's a lot to take in." "Of course. Hong Kong preparation is keeping me extremely busy, but I've reserved time next weekend for us to talk again after you've considered all the options." I paused, then added, "Whatever you decide, I'm committed to helping you find a workable solution." After ending the call, I stood on my terrace watching the Brooklyn sunset one of the last times before my international move. The emotion I felt wasn't satisfaction at their predicament, or even vindication that my caution had been justified. Instead, I felt a complex peace, the kind that comes from being able to respond to difficulty from a position of strength rather than reactivity. I hadn't built my financial security out of spite or to prove something to my family. I'd built it because stability and independence were essential to my sense of self after that formative experience in the hospital years ago. That this foundation now enabled me to help the very people who had once refused to help me wasn't ironic. It was the natural expression of the person I had chosen to become despite their treatment. The following week passed in a blur of final preparations for Hong Kong. My apartment was nearly packed, international banking arrangements finalized, and transitional projects at work completed. I deliberately kept myself too busy to dwell on my family's situation or their pending decision about my offered help. Friday evening, just 72 hours before my scheduled departure, my phone rang with my parents' number. "We've thought about everything you presented," my father began without preamble. "We want to accept your help, with all the conditions you outlined." The lack of hesitation surprised me. I had expected more resistance, more negotiation. "You're sure? The requirements are non-negotiable. This would be a significant change in how you manage your finances." "We're sure," my mother interjected. "Rachel, this situation has been a wake-up call for both of us." Her voice carried an unfamiliar humility. "We've spent years enabling Vanessa while underestimating you. The fact that you're willing to help us after everything, it makes us realize how much we've misjudged." The acknowledgement, however vague, was unexpected. "I appreciate that, Mom." "I know Hong Kong is happening very soon," my father said. "Would this change your plans? Would you need to be here to help us implement this?" The question revealed a lingering assumption that I might sacrifice my opportunity for their needs, the exact dynamic I was determined to transform. "No, my move proceeds as planned," I said firmly. "We live in a digital world. I can manage this support system remotely, set up the necessary arrangements, and conduct our check-ins via video. My location doesn't affect my commitment to helping." A brief silence, then my father said, "Of course. That makes sense." "There's something else we should discuss," I continued. "Vanessa needs to be part of this conversation. Her financial decisions directly impact your stability, and any solution requires her cooperation and changed behavior." My mother sighed. "She's been difficult since the engagement ended, barely leaving her room, refusing to discuss finances at all. Nevertheless, she needs to understand the situation and her role in the recovery plan. Can you ask her to join our next call?" They agreed, and we scheduled a family financial summit for the following evening, my last full day in New York before departure. When the call connected, I was surprised to see all three of them sitting together at the dining room table. Vanessa between our parents looking pale and subdued, a shadow of her usually confident self. "Hello, Vanessa," I said gently. "I'm glad you could join us." She nodded without meeting my eyes. "They said you have a plan to fix everything." "Not fix," I corrected. "Stabilize and rebuild. And it requires everyone's participation, including yours." I proceeded to outline the comprehensive approach, how I would help address the most urgent debts, establish consolidated payment plans for the remainder, create structured budgets for both households, and provide ongoing support with clear conditions. I emphasized that this wasn't a bailout, but a partnership towards sustainable financial health. Throughout my presentation, Vanessa remained uncharacteristically quiet, her expression shifting between shame, disbelief, and occasional flashes of resentment. Only when I finished did she finally speak. "Why would you do this? After how they treated you when you needed help with your medical bills? After how I've—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. The directness of her question silenced the room. It was the first time anyone in my family had explicitly acknowledged the disparity in how we'd been treated. How my medical emergency had been dismissed while Vanessa's wants had been consistently prioritized. "That's a fair question," I replied, appreciating her honesty despite its discomfort. "I'm not doing this to hold power over anyone or to make a point. I'm doing it because I can, because financial stability matters to me, and because despite our complicated history, you're my family." I paused, then added, "The past can't be changed, but we can choose what happens next." The conversation that followed was the most honest exchange our family had ever had. About money, certainly, but also about the deeper patterns of favoritism, enabling and misplaced priorities that had shaped our relationships for decades. There were uncomfortable moments, defensive reactions, and old wounds exposed. But there was also, surprisingly, the beginning of something that felt like respect, particularly from my father, who seemed to see me clearly perhaps for the first time. By the call's end, we had agreement on next steps, implementation timelines, and individual responsibilities. I would handle the financial architecture from Hong Kong, while they would each fulfill specific commitments toward recovery. "There's something else," my mother said as we were about to disconnect. "Rachel, we owe you an apology. When you needed us during your health crisis, we failed you completely. Watching you manage this situation with such competence and compassion, it highlights how wrongly we acted." The acknowledgement, so many years later, didn't erase the past hurt, but offered something I hadn't realized I still needed. Validation that the inequity had been real, not imagined. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. After ending the call, I stood in my nearly empty apartment, suitcases packed for a journey that represented both professional advancement and personal evolution. The situation with my family wasn't resolved. True financial recovery would take years of consistent effort, but something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. I had transformed from the overlooked daughter to the family stabilizer not through resentment or retaliation, but through the quiet power of building my own foundation stone by stone. The very crisis that might once have derailed me had instead revealed the strength I'd developed through necessity and determination. As I prepared to board my flight to Hong Kong 2 days later, I received a text message from Vanessa. "I never said thank you. Not just for the financial help, but for not giving up on me when you had every reason to. Safe travels. I'll do better." It wasn't an ending. Family stories never truly end. But it was a new beginning built on clearer vision, mutual respect, and the transformative power of responding to past injury with present strength rather than perpetuating cycles of hurt. I turned my phone to airplane mode and settled into my seat, ready for whatever challenges and opportunities awaited across the ocean, confident in the person I had become not because of my family's support, but despite its absence. Hong Kong embraced me with a symphony of contrasts. Ancient traditions alongside cutting-edge innovation, peaceful gardens nestled between soaring skyscrapers, familiar corporate structures infused with distinctly different cultural approaches. My apartment in mid-levels offered a breathtaking view of Victoria Harbour. The iconic skyline illuminated each night in a light show that never failed to remind me how far I'd come from that hospital bed in college. The professional challenge was exactly as promised: exhilarating, demanding, and transformative. Leading the Asia-Pacific division required me to expand beyond technical financial expertise into cultural intelligence, diplomatic relationship building, and strategic vision across diverse markets with unique regulatory environments. "You've adapted more quickly than any expat executive I've worked with," remarked Lin Wei, my deputy director and invaluable cultural guide. "Most Westerners try to impose their methods without understanding the underlying relationships. I learned early that assuming you know better than others is usually a mistake," I replied, thinking of how often my perspective had been dismissed by my family. That painful experience had inadvertently prepared me for cross-cultural leadership. I'd developed the habit of listening first, questioning my assumptions, and finding value in approaches different from my own. Each morning began with condensed Cantonese lessons with my tutor, Mr. Chung, followed by back-to-back meetings with clients and team members spanning multiple countries. Evenings often featured business dinners where relationships were cultivated, with patient attention to ritual and indirect communication. Weekends became precious opportunities for exploration, hiking the Dragon's Back Trail, discovering tiny temples hidden between skyscrapers, navigating the sensory kaleidoscope of street markets. But parallel to building my new life in Hong Kong ran my ongoing commitment to my family's financial recovery. Every Sunday evening, Monday morning in Hong Kong, I conducted a video meeting with my parents and Vanessa, reviewing the past week's financial activities, addressing challenges, and making adjustments to our recovery plan. The initial months were difficult. Old habits resisted change, and the transparency requirements I'd established often sparked defensive reactions. "I don't see why I need to explain a simple lunch expense," my mother protested during our third check-in. "It was just catching up with a friend." "Because the budget allocates $200 monthly for social dining, and you've already spent $180 with 3 weeks remaining," I explained patiently. Small decisions accumulate, and tracking helps identify patterns before they become problems. Vanessa's journey proved particularly challenging. After the humiliation of her broken engagement and financial exposure, she'd developed a complex relationship with money, oscillating between extreme frugality and occasional impulsive spending that seemed driven by emotional rather than practical needs. "I canceled my therapy appointment," she announced during one call. "It's an unnecessary expense." "That's not aligned with our priorities," I countered. "Mental health support is categorized as essential, not discretionary. The goal isn't deprivation. It's intentional allocation based on what genuinely matters." Gradually, incrementally, changes took root. My father, initially the most resistant to detailed oversight, became unexpectedly meticulous about tracking expenses. My mother discovered talents for bargain hunting and creative low-cost entertaining that preserved her social connections without the previous financial drain. Vanessa, with professional counseling I'd arranged through Meridian's Global Employee Assistance Program, began addressing the emotional drivers behind her spending habits. 6 months into the Hong Kong assignment, I received an unexpected email from my father with the subject line, "Monthly Budget Report April," and an attached spreadsheet. Opening it, I discovered he'd created a comprehensive tracking system that went beyond my original templates, including colorful graphs showing trend lines and progress toward goals. "Dad, this is impressive," I said during our next call. "You've added analytical elements I hadn't even suggested." He looked simultaneously proud and slightly embarrassed. "I've discovered I actually enjoy the numbers when I understand what they mean. It's like solving puzzles." He paused, then added quietly, "I wish I'd learned this 20 years ago." That moment marked a subtle shift in our dynamic, from me supporting their recovery to a more collaborative partnership where each person contributed their emerging strengths to our collective progress. Around the same time, my professional responsibilities in Hong Kong expanded significantly when one of our largest potential clients, Takashi Global Investments, requested that I personally handle their portfolio. The CEO, Hideki Takashi, had attended a presentation where I'd outlined an innovative approach to sustainable investment in developing Southeast Asian markets. "Ms. Winters understands what others miss," he told my superiors. "She sees beyond immediate profit to sustainable growth patterns." This perspective aligns with our multi-generational outlook. The Takashi account would substantially increase my division's portfolio and potentially establish Meridian's dominance in the sustainable finance sector across Asia. It also meant even more demanding hours, complex travel requirements, and heightened performance pressure. The evening after learning about this opportunity, I faced a familiar dilemma. Our scheduled family financial check-in conflicted directly with a crucial dinner meeting with the Takashi team. I briefly considered rescheduling the family call, knowing they'd understand the professional importance. Yet something in me resisted, not out of obligation, but from recognition of the commitment I'd made to consistent accountability in our recovery plan. Instead of choosing between responsibilities, I found a third option. I woke at 4:30 a.m. to conduct the family meeting before my workday began, adjusting my schedule rather than abandoning either commitment. Though exhausted that day, I felt a quiet satisfaction in honoring both aspects of my life without sacrificing either. The Takashi acquisition proved as transformative as anticipated, establishing our division as the regional leader in sustainable finance and significantly raising my profile within Meridian's global leadership. Articles about our approach appeared in financial publications, and competitors began attempting to replicate our models. 9 months into the Hong Kong assignment, Diana visited from New York headquarters for a quarterly review. After our formal meetings concluded, she invited me to dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the harbor. "The executive committee is impressed," she said, as we sipped wine while watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "You've exceeded every metric we established for this position: client acquisition, portfolio growth, team development. They're already discussing your next role when you return to New York." Pride warmed my chest, but something else accompanied it, a strange uncertainty I hadn't anticipated. "That's good to hear." Diana studied me carefully, but I sense hesitation. I considered deflecting but opted for honesty instead. "I'm not sure New York is where I want to return to." "Interesting." She set down her wine glass. "Where are you thinking?" "I don't know exactly. But this experience has shown me possibilities I hadn't considered before. Living internationally, working across cultures, building something new rather than simply advancing through established structures. The realization had been forming gradually as I navigated both my professional expansion and my family's transformation. Something fundamental had shifted in how I envisioned my future, less defined by reaction to past limitations and more by conscious creation of new possibilities. "Keep this between us for now," Diana said. "But there's discussion about establishing a new sustainability-focused division that would operate globally, not tied to any single regional office. Your name has come up as a potential founding director." The prospect sent a thrill of excitement through me, not just for the professional opportunity, but for the life structure it might allow. A global role with flexible location could enable me to maintain my independence while potentially being closer to my family, as needed during their ongoing recovery process. That night, I skipped the company car and walked part of the way back to my apartment, winding through neighborhoods where tradition and innovation coexisted in fascinating harmony. Like the city itself, I was discovering how to honor my past while embracing unprecedented possibilities. finding strength in my history without being confined by it. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected message from Vanessa asking if we could speak privately, outside our regular family financial meetings. Curious and slightly concerned, I arranged a video call during her evening, my early morning. When her face appeared on my screen, I was struck by how different she looked from the polished, image-conscious sister I'd known. Her makeup was minimal, her previously highlighted hair returned to its natural brown, her expression more authentic than I could remember seeing since we were children. "Thanks for making time," she began. "I've been wanting to talk to you about something important." "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Actually, yes. Better than okay." She took a deep breath. "I've been offered a job at the community college, coordinating their financial literacy program for students. It's nothing prestigious, nothing fancy, but I think I'd be good at it. I understand now what happens when people don't learn these skills early." The position represented everything her previous career aspirations had rejected. Modest salary, community focus, practical rather than glamorous work. Yet she spoke about it with more genuine enthusiasm than I'd heard in her voice in years. "That sounds perfect for you," I said sincerely. "Your experience gives you valuable perspective to share." "I wanted to ask your opinion before accepting," she continued. "The salary would mean adjusting my budget again, and I didn't want to disrupt the recovery plan." I was touched by her consideration. "We can make it work. Meaningful employment, aligned with your values, is worth adjusting numbers for." She nodded, then hesitated before adding, "There's something else. I've been thinking a lot about what happened when you were sick in college. How Mom and Dad refused to help with your medical bills but funded my European trip." Her eyes met mine directly. "I knew about it at the time, Rachel. I knew, and I said nothing. I even sent you those pictures showing off. It was cruel, and I'm truly sorry." The acknowledgement struck deeper than I'd expected. Throughout our financial recovery process, we'd addressed present behaviors and future plans, but the past injuries had remained largely unspoken. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, emotion tightening my throat. I was so caught up in being the favorite that I never questioned whether it was fair or right. I just accepted the benefits without thinking about the cost to you. She wiped away a tear. "Watching how you've handled everything, helping us, despite how we treated you, it's changed how I see myself and what matters." We talked for nearly 2 hours that morning, having the honest conversation we should have had years earlier, about the family dynamics that had shaped us both, the different wounds we'd carried, and the people we were becoming through this forced reckoning with reality. When we finally ended the call, I felt lighter somehow, as if naming the past injuries had diminished their power rather than amplified them. Vanessa's acknowledgement couldn't change what had happened, but it validated my experience in a way that helped integrate it into my story rather than standing as an unresolved chapter. The following weekend, I hiked to Victoria Peak alone, watching Hong Kong's remarkable skyline emerge through morning mist as I climbed. At the summit, surrounded by other early risers capturing photos of the spectacular view, I found a quiet spot to sit and absorb the panorama, the natural harbor embracing a city of human ambition and ingenuity. From that height, I could see both where I had come from and the limitless horizons ahead. The journey from that college hospital bed to this international summit had been driven initially by necessity and self-protection. But somewhere along the way, survival had transformed into thriving, reaction into creation, imposed limitation into chosen purpose. As I descended the mountain that morning, I composed an email accepting the exploratory discussions about the global sustainability division Diana had mentioned. Not because it represented status or achievement, but because it aligned with the person I had become, someone defined not by family patterns or past injuries, but by conscious values and chosen direction. That evening, I received an unexpected package from Minneapolis. Opening it, I found a handcrafted wooden box with intricate inlay work. A note in my father's handwriting explained, "I've taken up woodworking as a retirement hobby. Less expensive than golf, more satisfying than television. This is my first completed project. It seemed fitting that you should have it." Inside was a framed family photo I'd never seen before, taken when I was perhaps 4 years old, sitting on my father's shoulders at a park, laughing with unrestrained joy while Vanessa and my mother smiled beside us. Before financial patterns, before preferential treatment, before the comparative dynamics that would shape our relationships. I placed the photo on my desk beside my awards and credentials, not as a denial of everything that had happened since, but as acknowledgement that our story contained multitudes, both the pain and the love, the failures and the attempts at repair, the past we couldn't change, and the future we were actively reshaping. The challenges weren't over. True financial recovery would require years of consistent effort from my family. My professional path would bring new complexities and decisions. Our relationships would require ongoing attention and care to maintain their healthier patterns. But sitting in my Hong Kong apartment that evening, looking at both the family photo and the harbor lights below, I understood that the most significant transformation wasn't financial or even relational, it was internal. I had become a person who could respond to injury with strength rather than resentment, who could establish boundaries without building walls, who could honor the past without being imprisoned by it. The ultimate power wasn't in saying no to those who had once refused me, but in saying yes to the life I was consciously creating, a life defined not by what had been denied, but by what I had built from that very denial. 18 months into my Hong Kong assignment, life had settled into a productive rhythm. My Asia-Pacific division consistently exceeded quarterly targets. The Takashi account had expanded to include their subsidiary companies, and my Cantonese had progressed from basic pleasantries to functional business discussions. The family financial recovery plan was showing measurable progress. My parents had reduced their overall debt by nearly 40%. Vanessa had thrived in her new role at the community college, and our weekly check-ins had evolved from tense accountability sessions to collaborative planning meetings. Then came the email that would disrupt everything. "Rachel, call me as soon as you get this, regardless of time difference. Emergency situation with your father." My mother's message contained no other details, but the uncharacteristic urgency sent a chill through me despite Hong Kong's summer heat. I glanced at my watch. 2:15 p.m. in Hong Kong meant it was past midnight in Minneapolis. Whatever had prompted this message couldn't wait until morning. I dialed immediately, my heart pounding as the connection went through. "Mom, what's happened?" Her voice came through shaky but controlled. "Your father collapsed at the hardware store yesterday. They rushed him to North Memorial. It's his heart. They're saying he needs triple bypass surgery immediately." The world seemed to tilt slightly. My father, the stolid, sometimes stubborn man who had shaped so much of my life through both presence and absence, suddenly vulnerable, his mortality no longer theoretical. "The doctors are confident," my mother continued, filling the silence my shock had created. "But it's major surgery, Rachel, and there are complications with insurance coverage. Your father was planning to retire next year, and apparently the company changed their policy structure." She trailed off, the implications clear. Insurance complications. Of course. The universe had a dark sense of symmetry. "What's the financial picture?" I asked, automatically shifting into problem-solving mode while processing the emotional impact. The procedure itself will be partially covered, but there are significant out-of-pocket costs, plus post-surgical care, cardiac rehabilitation. Conservative estimates put it around $60,000 that insurance won't cover. The amount hung between us, not spoken as a request, yet the reason for her call was clear. Despite the progress in our family's financial recovery, they had no reserves for a medical emergency of this magnitude. The parallels to my own college crisis were impossible to ignore, though the stakes were dramatically higher. This wasn't an issue of fertility preservation or chronic pain management. This was immediately life-threatening. "I understand," I said. Decision already formed. "I'll handle the medical costs, all of them. Tell Dad to focus only on his recovery, not on money." The relief in my mother's voice was palpable. "Rachel, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. He's my father." The simplicity of the statement belied the complex emotions behind it. "I'll need to make some arrangements here, but I can be on a plane tomorrow." "You don't need to come," she protested weakly. "Your work is important, but not more important than family." The words emerged with a certainty that surprised even me. "I'll be there." After ending the call, I sat motionless in my office, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Hong Kong's urban landscape. The symmetry of the situation wasn't lost on me. My father facing a life-threatening condition requiring expensive medical intervention, just as I had years earlier, the same core scenario with reversed roles. But this wasn't about settling scores or proving points. This was about the person I'd chosen to become, someone who acted from values rather than reactions, from strength rather than woundedness. I made 3 calls in rapid succession: to Lin Wei, delegating immediate operational responsibilities; to Diana in New York, explaining the family emergency; and to Meridian's travel department, arranging the fastest possible route to Minneapolis. Then I headed home to pack, my mind working through logistical challenges and contingency plans. 27 hours later, I walked into North Memorial Hospital, the antiseptic smell triggering visceral memories of my own medical crisis years earlier. My mother sat alone in the cardiac unit waiting room, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of hasty assembly. She rose when she saw me, crossing the room with outstretched arms. The hug we shared felt different from any in recent memory, not the perfunctory physical contact of obligatory family ritual, but genuine connection born of shared concern. "He's in pre-op," she explained, leading me to sit beside her. "The surgery is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. They're doing final assessments and preparations now. Have you seen him today? How is he mentally?" Scared, though he'd never admit. A sad smile crossed her face. "You know your father. Showing vulnerability doesn't come naturally." I nodded, recognizing the trait I'd inherited despite my best efforts. "They'll let us visit briefly this evening," she continued. "He'll be glad to see you, though he was adamant you shouldn't disrupt your work. He keeps saying it's just plumbing. Repairs." Typical dad, minimizing a life-threatening situation to avoid burdening others, the same approach that had likely contributed to his heart condition in the first place. Years of stress, untreated hypertension, and ignored warning signs had culminated in this crisis. When we were finally allowed to visit, I was shocked by his appearance. My father had always been robust, not particularly tall, but solid, radiating the physical confidence of someone who had worked with his hands before moving into management. Now he seemed diminished against the white hospital sheets, monitoring equipment surrounding him like futuristic sentinels. "Rachel?" His voice was raspy, but strong. "You shouldn't have come all this way. I'm fine." "Clearly," I replied with gentle sarcasm, gesturing to the medical equipment. "Just a routine tune-up, right?" A smile flickered across his face. "Exactly. Be back on the golf course in no time." We kept the conversation light during the brief permitted visit, avoiding both medical details and financial implications. Only as we were preparing to leave did he reach for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Your mother told me what you're doing," he said, emotion making his voice rough. "I don't deserve it." The simple acknowledgement caught me off guard. "It's not about deserving, Dad. It's about family." his eyes so similar to my own, held mine. I've had a lot of time to think lying here, about patterns, mistakes. He glanced at my mother, who had stepped slightly away to give us a moment. When you needed us during college, we failed you. I failed you. Used some twisted logic about independence and life lessons to justify not helping when I could have. The direct acknowledgement of what had happened, without deflection or qualification, was unprecedented. I stood silently, letting him continue. I've been trying to understand why I made that decision, he said, his gaze moving to the ceiling. I think I was jealous, in some way, of your potential, your opportunities, the doors open to you that were closed to me at your age. He looked back at me. Not an excuse, just a realization. I limited you because I had been limited, and there's no justification for that. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. We don't need to talk about this now, Dad. You should rest. If a triple bypass doesn't qualify as the right time, for honesty, I don't know what does. A weak smile. I'm proud of you, Rachel. Not just for this, but for the person you've become despite my failures. I should have said it years ago. The words I'd unconsciously longed to hear for decades hung in the sterile hospital air between us. Not dramatic enough for a movie scene. Perhaps, but profound in their simple authenticity. Thank you, I managed, squeezing his hand. Now focus on getting better. We'll have time for more conversations after your recovery. Outside in the corridor, my mother touched my arm. He means it, you know. These past months, working through the financial recovery plan with you, he's been different, more reflective, less certain he always knows best. Heart problems have a way of clarifying priorities, I said, remembering my own medical journey and its impact on my life direction. It's not just the heart attack, she corrected gently. It's you. Watching how you've handled everything, your career, our financial situation, the way you've helped without condescension or resentment. It's changed him. Changed me, too. We spent the night at my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in, though it felt smaller now, the decor slightly dated despite my mother's interior design background. Budget constraints from our financial recovery plan had put her usual redecorating schedule on hold. Vanessa arrived late that evening, having driven from her apartment immediately after teaching her evening financial literacy class. Her transformation continued to surprise me. The designer clothes replaced by practical comfort. The competitive edge softened into genuine concern. "How is he?" she asked as she set her overnight bag in the entryway. "Stable. Surgery tomorrow morning. Typical Dad, acting like it's a minor inconvenience rather than open-heart surgery." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "And Mom?" "Holding it together, but scared. She's finally sleeping now." We moved to the kitchen, where I made tea in the familiar motions of childhood routine. Sitting across from each other at the breakfast nook where we'd once argued over cereal and bathroom scheduling, we existed in a strange temporal blend. Adults with our complicated history, yet momentarily transported to simpler roles by the setting and circumstances. "I can take a leave from work to help with his recovery," Vanessa offered. "The college has a good family medical leave policy, and my schedule is more flexible than yours." I studied my sister's face, the genuine offer reflecting her continued evolution. That would be incredibly helpful. My leave from Hong Kong is limited, and someone will need to monitor his recovery program and help Mom. "Consider it done." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "It's the least I can do, considering how much you've already done for all of us." The surgery itself unfolded with the particular distortion of time that accompanies medical crises, moments of intense activity punctuated by hours of anxious waiting. The cardiac surgeon met with us beforehand, a composed woman with clear eyes and methodical speech who outlined the procedure, risks, and expected outcomes with compassionate directness. During the 5-hour operation, We maintained a rotating presence in the waiting area, my mother alternating between nervous pacing and forced stillness, Vanessa organizing a meal delivery schedule with neighbors and church members, me handling both hospital administrative details and urgent work matters that couldn't be fully delegated despite my emergency leave. When the surgeon finally appeared in the waiting room doorway, her facial expression told us everything before she spoke a word. The surgery went very well. We completed the triple bypass as planned, and his heart is responding excellently. He's in recovery now. The collective release of tension was physical. My mother's shoulders dropping, Vanessa's hands unclenching, my own tightly controlled breathing finally deepening. The immediate crisis had passed, though a long recovery journey remained ahead. The next 3 days established our new temporary reality. Hospital visits scheduled around my father's essential rest, medical team consultations where I ask the detailed questions my mother couldn't formulate through her emotional fog, and quiet evenings at home planning for the transition to post-hospital recovery. Throughout it all, I managed both the immediate needs in Minneapolis and my ongoing responsibilities in Hong Kong, working in the pre-dawn hours to accommodate the time difference. Lin Wei had stepped up admirably in my absence, keeping our division functioning smoothly while providing just enough information to keep me connected without overwhelming my already taxed capacity. On the 4th day after surgery, as my father was being prepared for discharge, I received an unexpected video call request from Diana. Stepping away from the hospital room to a quiet corner of the waiting area, I connected. "Rachel," she began. "Without preamble, I won't ask how you're managing a family medical crisis and an international division simultaneously, but the executive committee is impressed. Your team hasn't missed a beat." "Lin deserves the credit," I replied. "He's been exceptional." "Good leaders create systems that function in their absence," she countered. "But that's not why I'm calling. The Global Sustainability Division we discussed has been formally approved for development. They want you to head it, effective upon your return from Hong Kong." Under normal circumstances, this news would have been cause for celebration, the culmination of years of work and vision. In the context of my father's condition and my family's ongoing needs, it presented a complex decision matrix. "The position would be based in New York?" I asked, mind already calculating implications. "That's what I wanted to discuss. Given recent developments, the committee is open to a more flexible arrangement, a hybrid structure with you splitting time between New York headquarters and a satellite office closer to your family situation. Minneapolis has a small Meridian presence that could be expanded." The offer represented unprecedented accommodation, reflecting both my value to the organization and changing workplace paradigms. It also presented a potential solution to the dilemma I'd been contemplating since arriving at my father's bedside: how to balance my established career trajectory with the recognition that my family might need more direct support during this health crisis and beyond. "I'd need some time to consider all the implications," I said cautiously. "Of course. Focus on your father's immediate recovery. We can discuss details when you return to Hong Kong." Later that evening, as we settled my father into the guest bedroom my mother had converted for his recovery, hospital bed, monitoring equipment, accessibility modifications, I observed the subtle dynamics between my parents. My mother's fierce protectiveness, my father's frustrated vulnerability, their interdependence highlighted by crisis in ways their normal routine obscured. "Your flight back to Hong Kong is Sunday?" my mother asked as we prepared a dinner adapted to my father's new dietary restrictions. "Yes, though I've been thinking about that." I arranged heart-healthy vegetable portions on serving plates. "Dad's recovery will take months, not weeks. You'll need consistent support. Vanessa has already arranged her work schedule to help," she reminded me. "And the neighbors have been wonderful. You have your own life, Rachel. We don't expect you to put everything on hold for us." The irony of her statement, so different from the expectations placed on me during family financial crisis, wasn't lost on either of us. But this wasn't about scorekeeping or reciprocity. It was about consciously chosen values rather than imposed obligations. I'm exploring some potential adjustments to my role, I said carefully. Nothing definite yet, but possibly an arrangement that would allow me to be closer geographically while maintaining my career progression. She looked up from the salad she was preparing, surprise evident. You'd consider moving back to Minneapolis? After everything? Near Minneapolis, possibly, with a flexible structure that would still involve significant travel and time in New York. I continued arranging the meal. It's just an option I'm evaluating, nothing decided. Because of your father's condition? Rachel, you shouldn't make career decisions based on what matters to me, I interrupted gently. On the life I want to create, not just the position I want to hold. Those aren't always the same thing. She studied me with new understanding. You've changed a lot since college. We didn't see it happening gradually, but coming back now, the difference is striking. Crisis has a way of accelerating evolution, I replied. For all of us. Over dinner, eaten in the living room where my father could remain in his specialized recliner, we discussed the practical aspects of cardiac recovery, medication schedules, dietary restrictions, physical therapy progression, and emotional adjustments. Throughout the conversation, I observed a fundamental shift in our family dynamic, a collaborative problem-solving approach rather than hierarchical direction, mutual respect for different strengths rather than comparative evaluation. Later that night, reviewing work documents while my parents slept, I found myself contemplating the strange symmetry of life's patterns. The medical crisis that had once revealed the limitations of my family relationships had now, years later, highlighted their transformation. The financial expertise I'd developed partly in response to being denied support had become the very tool I now use to provide that support to others. There was a profound lesson in this circular journey. Not that hardship is always redeemed, or that painful experiences inevitably lead to growth, but that our responses to difficulty shape more than our circumstances. They shape our character. The person I had become through necessity was now someone who could make choices from abundance rather than scarcity, from possibility rather than constraint. As dawn broke over Minneapolis, painting the sky in colors, so different from Hong Kong's sunrise yet equally beautiful, I made my decision. I would accept the Global Sustainability Division leadership with a hybrid location model, not as a compromise between career and family obligation, but as an integrated expression of my complete values and priorities. The journey from that college hospital bed to this moment had never been about proving myself to those who had underestimated me. It had been about becoming someone who could transcend the limitations others had imposed, someone whose decisions emerged from internal wisdom rather than external validation or reaction. The path ahead would bring its own challenges, establishing the new division, balancing global responsibilities with local presence, supporting my father's recovery while maintaining appropriate boundaries. But I would navigate these complexities not as burdens, but as opportunities to continue growing into the person I was choosing to become. Someone defined not by what had been denied, but by what I consciously cultivated. Are you sure about this? Floor plan? The support beam placement limits our options considerably. The architect pointed to the blueprint spread across my dining table, her pencil tapping a problematic intersection of walls. I leaned forward, studying the structural constraints of the 1930s warehouse I'd purchased on the outskirts of Minneapolis. What if we embrace the industrial elements instead of hiding them? Make the support columns features rather than obstacles. 6 months had passed since my father's surgery. In that time, my life had undergone a comprehensive redesign as substantial as the building renovation before me. After completing my Hong Kong assignment, I'd established my base in Minneapolis while launching Meridian's Global Sustainability Division, a hybrid arrangement that required frequent travel to New York, London, and Singapore, but allowed proximity to my recovering father. The warehouse conversion represented more than just a place to live. It was a physical manifestation of my evolved perspective. Located halfway between my parents' suburban home and downtown Minneapolis, the space balanced connection and independence, history and innovation, roots and possibilities. Client meeting in 20 minutes, reminded Eliza, my newly hired assistant who managed my complex schedule across multiple time zones. She'd originally applied for an administrative position at Meridian, but had impressed me with her organizational brilliance and quiet confidence. Virtual presentation to the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. All materials are uploaded and tested. I nodded, gathering the architectural plans into a folder. We'll continue this tomorrow, Mira. I love the direction we're heading, especially the rooftop garden concept. After the architect departed, I moved to my temporary home office in what would eventually become the warehouse's guest suite. The renovation would take another 4 months, but I'd made the unconventional decision to live on site during construction, cordoning off essential spaces while workers transformed the remainder of the building. My colleagues thought I was slightly mad for living amid construction dust and noise, but I found something compelling about watching the daily progress, seeing potential gradually becoming reality through consistent intentional effort. The Norwegian presentation went exceptionally well. Meridian's global sustainability initiative had gained remarkable traction in the 9 months since its inception, attracting clients who recognized that long-term profitability required environmental and social responsibility alongside financial returns. What had once been considered niche or idealistic was now seen as necessary and pragmatic. "Excellent work as always, Rachel," commented Bernard Klein, Meridian's CEO, who had joined the presentation midway. "The Scandinavians clearly appreciate your approach. Let's debrief tomorrow during our executive committee meeting." After concluding the call, I changed from business attire into casual clothes and drove to my parents' home for our weekly family dinner. These Thursday gatherings had become a cornerstone of our reconstructed relationships, a consistent space for connection without the intense focus on finances that had characterized our earlier recovery meetings. My father answered the door. Moving slowly but steadily with the assistance of a walking cane, he increasingly used only out of caution rather than necessity. His cardiac rehabilitation had progressed remarkably well, partly due to his surprisingly diligent adherence to recovery protocols and partly due to his stubborn determination to regain independence. "Right on time," he greeted me with a warm hug. "Your mother's trying a new heart-healthy recipe she found. Something with quinoa. I'm reserving judgment." "Brave man," I teased, following him into the house that had once been a source of such complicated emotions for me but now felt simply like my parents' home, neither idealized nor rejected, just one element in our shared history. In the kitchen, my mother was arranging a colorful salad while consulting her tablet. "Rachel, perfect timing. Can you taste this dressing and tell me if it needs more lemon?" Vanessa arrived moments later, bringing a colleague from the community college, a quiet, thoughtful economics professor named Michael, who had been appearing at family gatherings with increasing frequency. Their relationship was evolving gradually, thoughtfully, without the flashy external validation that had characterized Vanessa's previous romantic choices. Dinner conversation flowed naturally between personal updates and broader discussions. My father's gradual return to consulting work with his former company, my mother's renewed interior design projects with a focus on affordable transformations, Vanessa's expanding financial literacy program, and my ongoing balance of global responsibilities and local presence. "The Norwegian Sovereign Fund presentation went well," I mentioned while helping myself to more salad. "They're committed to divesting from fossil fuels entirely within 5 years and want Meridian to develop the transition strategy." "I still don't fully understand what you do," my mother admitted with a self-deprecating smile so different from her previous dismissiveness of my career. "But I know it's important, and you're excellent at it. She helps giant pools of money avoid destroying the planet while still making profits." Vanessa explained succinctly. Basically, environmental and financial alchemy. Speaking of money, my father said, his expression growing more serious, your mother and I have been working on something we'd like to discuss with both of you. He nodded to my mother, who rose and retrieved a folder from the kitchen counter. As you know, we've been following Rachel's financial recovery plan for nearly 2 years now, she began, opening the folder to reveal neatly organized documents. Thanks to her guidance and your father's pension arrangement, we've eliminated most of our debt and established modest savings again. My father continued, we've also been thinking about the future, specifically what happens after we're gone. Dad, Vanessa protested, you're recovered. Let's not. He held up a hand. Heart surgery has a way of clarifying priorities. Your mother and I have updated our will and financial directives. We want to be completely transparent about our decisions. My mother distributed copies of a summary document to both Vanessa and me. We've restructured everything based on what we've learned through our financial recovery. No secrets, no surprises, and most importantly, she glanced meaningfully at my father. No inequity. Examining the document, I understood what she meant. Their modest estate, the house, retirement accounts, personal possessions, was arranged with scrupulous equality between Vanessa and me. More significant than the material aspects was the careful transparency of their planning, so different from the opacity that had characterized financial matters throughout our childhood. There's something else, my father added, meeting my eyes directly. We want to repay the medical expenses you covered for my surgery. I shook my head immediately. That's unnecessary. It was freely given, not a loan. We understand that, my mother said gently. But this is important to us, especially to your father. Not because we feel obligated, but because it represents something more significant to us. My father nodded. When you needed medical help in college, we had the resources to assist but chose not to, using flawed reasoning about independence and life lessons. When I needed medical help, you had every justification to make the same choice. But you didn't. You showed us a better way. The acknowledgement hung in the air between us, not as an apology seeking absolution, but as recognition of growth and learning that had transformed all of us. We've established a repayment fund, my mother explained, indicating the relevant section of the document. It's structured over 3 years to work within our recovery plan parameters. You taught us that healthy financial decisions honor both relationship and responsibility. I considered their proposal, understanding that this wasn't about the money itself, but about reclaiming agency in their financial lives and establishing a new pattern of equitable family support. Refusing their plan would deny them the dignity of this evolution. I appreciate what this represents, I said carefully. If this is truly important to you both, I won't object. But I'd like to suggest an alternative for the funds. Their curious expressions encouraged me to continue. What if we established a medical emergency fund for students at Vanessa's community college? Many face situations similar to what I experienced, caught between inadequate insurance and prohibitive costs. The money could provide grants for necessary medical procedures not covered by student health plans. The suggestion bridged our family's past and present, acknowledging the painful history while transforming it into something constructive rather than dwelling in recrimination. It honored both my parents' desire for repayment and my conviction that financial decisions should reflect deeper values beyond transaction. I think that's perfect, Vanessa responded immediately, her eyes brightening with professional excitement. I see students struggling with medical costs constantly. We could structure it as a matching grant program to maximize impact. My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication built on decades together. My father nodded slightly, then turned to me. That feels right. A way of creating something better from our past mistakes. After dinner, while Vanessa and Michael helped my mother with dessert, My father invited me to join him for a brief walk in the backyard, a ritual that had become part of his cardiac recovery routine. The autumn evening carried the crispness of approaching winter, leaves crunching beneath our feet as we followed the perimeter of the property. "Bernard Klein called me last week," he said after we'd walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The statement surprised me. "Meridian's CEO called you? Why?" "To discuss you, actually." He smiled at my confusion. "Apparently, there's an opening on their board of directors. He wanted my perspective, given our family connection." I stopped, walking, genuinely shocked. Board positions at Meridian were typically filled by former financial industry executives with decades of experience, not 30-something division leaders, regardless of their success. "What did you tell him?" I asked, curiosity overcoming. My surprise? "That you'd likely refuse if you knew I'd been consulted," he replied with unexpected insight. "And that based on what I've observed of your work ethic, strategic thinking, and ethical compass, they'd be fortunate to have you. But the decision should be based on your merits, not my assessment." The response reflected how profoundly our relationship had evolved. From the father who had once dismissed my financial crisis as a life lesson to someone who recognized and respected my professional capability while understanding my need for independent evaluation. "Thank you for that," I said simply. He nodded, then added, "The warehouse renovation, it's coming along well?" "Slowly but steadily. The bones of the building are exceptional, but integrating modern systems while preserving historical elements is complex. Not unlike rebuilding family relationships," he observed with unexpected metaphorical insight. "Honoring the history while creating something that functions better for the present." The comparison startled me with its accuracy. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, very similar. We continued walking, the conversation shifting to more practical matters. His upcoming cardiology appointment, my travel schedule for the coming month, plans for the winter holidays. Yet his architectural metaphor lingered in my thoughts, illuminating aspects of our journey I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. Later that evening, returning to my warehouse in progress, I stood in what would eventually become the central living space. Construction equipment and materials created shadows in the security lighting, the partial walls and exposed beams revealing both the building's history and its potential future. Like my family relationships, the structure was neither complete nor perfect, but intentionally evolving through consistent effort and clear vision. My phone chimed with a text from Diana. "Norwegian Fund confirming full commitment. Executive. Committee impressed. Board nomination proceeding. Call me when you can." The professional recognition represented yet another milestone in a career built initially from necessity, but sustained by genuine passion and purpose. What had begun as a path to self-sufficiency had evolved into meaningful work that aligned with my deepest values, not just financial expertise but sustainable prosperity, not just wealth accumulation but responsible stewardship. As I moved through the partially constructed space that would soon become my home, I considered the parallel reconstructions occurring in my life: professional, relational, physical, and internal. None were complete, all were progressing through intentional design rather than reactive patterns. The journey from that college hospital bed to this moment had never been linear. It had included detours, obstacles, unexpected challenges, and surprising opportunities. Yet through each phase, something fundamental had been forming, not just successful career progression or financial security, but a deeper capacity to create rather than merely respond, to build rather than merely survive. My phone rang again, AI video call from Lin Wei in Hong Kong, where it was already morning. "Sorry for the early call," he apologized when I answered. "But the Singapore team has encountered regulatory questions on the Malaysian renewable energy project. They need your guidance before their government meeting at noon." "Send me the briefing materials," I replied, moving toward my temporary office. I'll review them immediately and connect with the Singapore team in 20 minutes. As I settled, at my desk, pulling up the complex regulatory frameworks governing cross-border sustainability investments, I felt a quiet certainty amid the pressure. This ability to navigate complexity while maintaining perspective hadn't come from academic training alone, but from the more profound education of my personal journey, learning to build solutions where others saw only problems, to create possibility, from constraint to transform limitation into opportunity. The warehouse construction would continue methodically in the coming months, each day bringing the vision closer to reality through consistent, purposeful effort. My family relationships would continue their evolution through honest communication and mutual respect rather than obligation or habit. My career would advance through contribution and capability rather than ambition alone. None of these reconstructions would ever reach perfect completion. They would remain works in progress, requiring ongoing attention and adaptation. But therein lay their beauty and strength, not in flawless permanence, but in conscious evolution, not in arrival, but in purposeful journey. The person I had become through necessity and challenge was now someone who could build intentionally, rather than merely respond to circumstances, an architect of my own experience, rather than merely its inhabitant. The greatest reconstruction of all had been internal, the transformation from someone defined by what had been denied to someone empowered by what could be created. As I immersed myself in solving the regulatory challenges for the Singapore team, I realized that the skills I was applying professionally had been forged in personal experience. The ability to see beyond immediate obstacles to underlying patterns, to find unconventional pathways through seemingly intractable problems, to balance pragmatic reality with ambitious vision. The reconstruction continues, in my warehouse home, in my family dynamics, in my professional evolution, and in my internal landscape. None will ever be finished in the conventional sense, but all are progressing through consistent, intentional effort toward something more aligned with genuine value and purpose than what existed before. Perhaps that is the most profound lesson of this journey, that our most significant transformations never reach completion, but continue evolving through conscious choice and consistent action. The warehouse will become a home, but will require ongoing maintenance. Family relationships will deepen, but will demand continued attention. Career success will bring new challenges requiring further growth. The reconstruction is not the means to an end, but the journey itself. The daily choice to build something meaningful from whatever materials life provides, whether ideal or imperfect, expected or surprising. What matters is not the perfection of the result, but the integrity of the process, the alignment with authentic values rather than imposed expectations. As dawn breaks over Minneapolis, light filtering through the warehouse's industrial windows, to create patterns across partially constructed walls, I recognize the beauty in this unfinished state. The visible potential, the revealed structure, the honest display of both history and possibility existing simultaneously in the same space. Like this building, I remain a work in progress, shaped by the past, but not confined by it, honoring history while creating future, maintaining structural integrity while embracing transformation. The reconstruction continues, and therein lies its power and promise. Spring arrived in Minnesota with its characteristic ambivalence. Brilliant sunshine one day, snow flurries the next. Nature's indecision mirrored the transitional state of my warehouse home, now in its final stages of transformation. The major structural work was complete, systems were operational, and finishing touches were being applied throughout the space. I stood in the newly completed rooftop garden, watching the morning light illuminate downtown Minneapolis in the distance. The urban farm setup, raised beds prepared for planting, rainwater collection system installed, beehives awaiting their summer residents, represented perhaps my favorite aspect of the renovation. In a space that could have easily become a standard entertainment deck, I'd instead created a productive ecosystem that connected urban living with natural cycles. "The irrigation system checks out perfectly," called Julius, the urban agriculture specialist I'd hired to design the rooftop garden. "Once we install the sensors next week, the entire system will adjust water delivery based on soil moisture, temperature, and weather forecasts." "Perfect," I replied, making notes on my tablet. "And the bee colonies arrive when?" "Mid-May. The timing should coordinate nicely with your first plantings." He gestured toward the apiary section. "The hives are positioned for ideal morning sun while being protected from prevailing winds. These girls will be living in luxury." The reference to the comfort of creatures many people feared or dismissed struck me as particularly fitting. Throughout this renovation, I'd consistently chosen to value elements others might overlook, preserving the warehouse's industrial character rather than concealing it, incorporating sustainable systems that prioritized long-term responsibility over immediate convenience, creating space for natural processes within an urban context. My phone vibrated with an incoming message. "Board materials finalized for tomorrow's quarterly meeting. Sustainability Impact Report generates substantial positive feedback from institutional investors. Diana." The timing of my board of directors appointment had coincided almost perfectly with the completion of my warehouse home, two culminations arriving simultaneously after months of careful development. Though I was the youngest member of Meridian's board by nearly 2 decades, my unique perspective on sustainable finance had proven valuable during a period when the industry was navigating significant paradigm shifts. After responding to Diana's message, I received a calendar notification for my monthly lunch with Vanessa. Our relationship had evolved from sporadic, tension-filled interactions to a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared experiences. The monthly lunches had begun as casual catch-ups, but had gradually transformed into meaningful exchanges about personal growth, professional challenges, and family dynamics. Vanessa was waiting at our usual table at Riverfront Bistro, a locally owned restaurant specializing in seasonal ingredients sourced from regional farms. Her appearance had continued its evolution away from designer showcasing toward authentic self-expression. Today, she wore a simple linen dress with handcrafted earrings, made by one of her community college students. "The big move-in is tomorrow, right?" she asked after we'd ordered. "The warehouse is finally finished?" "Substantially complete," I qualified. "There are still some minor details and adjustments, but all systems are operational and the space is fully livable. The art installation in the main living area arrives next week, and the rooftop garden planting begins this weekend." "I still can't believe you lived there during construction," she said, shaking her head. "The noise, the dust, the constant disruption, it would have driven me completely mad." "It was educational," I replied. "Watching the daily progress, understanding how each component connects to the others, seeing problems solved in real time rather than just final results. It changed my relationship with the space. It's not just a home I purchased, but one I witnessed being created." Vanessa studied me with the thoughtful expression that had replaced her former quick judgments. "That's very you, Rachel. Most people want the finished product without engaging with the process. You've always valued understanding the underlying systems." Her observation was accurate, but incomplete. My appreciation for process over mere outcomes hadn't always been my nature. It had developed through necessity, through experiences that forced me to build methodically when instant solutions weren't available. The college medical crisis that my parents wouldn't resolve, the financial foundation I'd had to construct independently, the career I'd built step by steady step, all had taught me to value gradual, intentional development over quick fixes, or surface appearances. "How's Dad doing with the new treatment protocol?" I asked, shifting the conversation to our shared concern. Though my father's recovery from bypass surgery had progressed well initially, recent checkups had revealed complications requiring additional medication adjustments and more intensive monitoring. While not immediately life-threatening, these developments had reminded our family of the precarious nature of health and the importance of present connections over deferred relationships. "Better than last month," Vanessa reported. "The adjusted dosage seems to be working, and his energy levels are improving. Mom says he's actually following the exercise recommendations without complaint, which might be the most shocking development of all." We both smiled at this evidence of our father's continued evolution. The formerly authoritative man who would never admit weakness now approaching his health challenges with humble diligence. "And how are things with Michael?" I asked. "You mentioned he was applying for the department chair position." Vanessa's expression brightened. "He got it. The announcement came through yesterday. It's a 3-year appointment with potential renewal." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "His financial literacy collaboration with your program has already made such an impact." "It's been transformative for the students," she agreed. "Last semester's cohort showed a 40% reduction in predatory loan applications compared to previous years. Real, measurable change in financial decision-making." The passion in her voice reflected how thoroughly she had embraced her role at the community college, not as a step down from corporate marketing, but as meaningful work aligned with her evolving values. The sister who had once measured success through acquisition and appearance now found fulfillment in expanding financial capability among vulnerable populations. As our lunch continued, we discussed plans for our parents' upcoming wedding anniversary, Vanessa's ideas for expanding the college's financial education program to local high schools, and my preparations for an upcoming international conference on sustainable investment in emerging economies. "Before I forget," Vanessa said as we finished our meal, "the first distributions from the Medical Emergency Fund have been approved. 3 students will receive assistance this semester, 1 for necessary dental surgery, another for prescription coverage during an insurance gap, and a 3rd for physical therapy following a car accident." The fund we'd established using my parents' surgery repayment had grown more quickly than anticipated, partly due to matching contributions from local businesses Vanessa had skillfully recruited. What had begun as a way to transform our family's painful history into constructive action was now creating tangible benefits for students facing circumstances similar to my college experience. "That's exactly what we hoped for," I replied, feeling a particular satisfaction different from professional accomplishments. Real help during vulnerable moments, preventing cascading financial consequences from health issues. Walking back to my office after lunch, I reflected on the expanding impact of choices made initially from necessity rather than strategic philanthropy. The medical fund represented a perfect example, born from our family's complicated history but evolving into something larger than personal reconciliation. Like ripples expanding from a stone dropped in water, the effects were reaching beyond their origin point to touch lives we would never directly encounter. That evening, as I supervised the final furniture placement in my warehouse home, my phone rang with my mother's number. "I hope I'm not interrupting your moving process," she began. "Just directing traffic at this point," I assured her. "The heavy lifting is being handled by professionals. What's up?" "Your father and I were talking about the anniversary dinner next month. We'd like to host it at your new place instead of a restaurant, if you're comfortable with that, of course. We thought it would be meaningful to celebrate in your home, given everything that's happened these past few years." The request represented a significant departure from previous patterns. Family gatherings had always centered around my parents' home or restaurants they selected. That they would suggest celebrating their anniversary in my space indicated a fundamental shift in family dynamics, a recognition of changed roles and relationships. "I'd be honored," I replied, genuinely touched. "The space will be fully settled by then, and the rooftop garden should be coming into its first blooms. It would be perfect." After ending the call, I continued directing the placement of furnishings. Throughout the warehouse, each piece selected for both function and meaning rather than status or appearance. The dining table, crafted from reclaimed timber salvaged during the renovation. The living room seating, arranged for conversation, rather than television viewing. The office suite, designed for collaboration as well as individual work. As evening settled over Minneapolis, I climbed to the rooftop garden to watch the sunset transform the urban landscape. The city lights began emerging against the darkening sky, creating constellations of human activity across the metropolitan tapestry. From this elevation, individual buildings blended into collective patterns: financial district, university campus, cultural centers, residential neighborhoods, distinct but interconnected. My phone chimed with an email notification from an unfamiliar address. Opening it, I discovered a message from a college student named Elise Wright. "Dear Ms. Winters, you don't know me, but I received emergency medical funding this semester through the Winters Family Medical Grant at Minneapolis Community College. I'm writing to express my profound gratitude for this program. When I was diagnosed with a condition requiring surgery my insurance wouldn't fully cover, I faced impossible choices between medical care and continuing my education. Your grant provided exactly what I needed in that critical moment, not just financial assistance, but the knowledge that someone understood this specific challenge. Professor Winters mentioned that this fund was established based on personal experience with medical costs during college. I want you to know that your decision to transform that experience into support for others has made an immeasurable difference in my life. My surgery was successful, recovery is progressing well, and I remain on track for graduation next year without the crippling debt I feared. Thank you for seeing those of us caught in these gaps and creating a bridge where none existed before. Sincerely, Elise Wright, nursing student, class of 2023. The message crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated, that the most meaningful achievements of my journey weren't the professional accolades, financial security, or even personal growth, but the capacity to transform difficult experiences into resources that prevented others from facing the same struggles alone. My parents' refusal to help with my medical costs years ago had created not just a financial crisis, but an existential one, a painful revelation about my place in our family system, and the conditional nature of support I had assumed was unconditional. That wound had initially fueled self-protection and independence, necessary survival mechanisms in the moment. But somewhere along the way, necessity had evolved into something more purposeful. The self-sufficiency developed through difficulty had become a foundation for genuine choice rather than reactive patterns. The financial expertise cultivated from pragmatic need had grown into meaningful work with broader impact. The boundaries established for protection had matured into healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Looking out over the city as darkness settled fully, lights twinkling against the night sky, I considered the interconnected journeys that had brought me to this moment: professional development, family reconciliation, personal evolution, and now this extension of impact beyond my immediate circle. None had progressed linearly. All had included setbacks, reconsiderations, and unexpected developments. The transformation from wounded college student to confident professional hadn't occurred through some dramatic epiphany, but through consistent small choices accumulating over time. The healing of family relationships hadn't happened through performative forgiveness, but through changed behaviors and sustained effort. The extension from personal achievement to broader contribution hadn't required extraordinary wealth or power, but simply the willingness to connect individual experience to collective needs. As I descended from the rooftop to my nearly completed home, I moved through spaces that reflected this integration of past and present, individual and community, necessity and intention. The warehouse's industrial bones remained visible, but now supported contemporary function. Historical elements had been preserved while new systems enabled sustainable operation. What had been created in response to my particular needs now incorporated capacity for connection and contribution beyond myself. Tomorrow would bring the official move-in, the beginning of daily life in this thoughtfully reconstructed space. The following day would feature my participation in Meridian's quarterly board meeting, where our sustainable investment strategies would be evaluated against both financial returns and environmental impact metrics. Next week would include mentoring, sessions with junior team members, preparations for the international conference, and volunteer hours at Vanessa's financial literacy program. None of these activities existed in isolation, all connected through the integration of values and purpose that had gradually emerged from experiences that once seemed merely painful or unfair. The medical crisis that my parents wouldn't resolve had ultimately led to financial expertise that now helped others navigate complex economic systems. The relationship patterns that had once diminished me had motivated the development of healthier connections based on authenticity rather than role fulfillment. The ripples continued expanding, touching lives beyond my direct experience. Students receiving medical assistance, communities benefiting from sustainable investment, colleagues developing their own capacities through mentorship. Not because I had set out with grand philanthropic ambitions, but because responding to personal challenge with integrity creates natural extensions beyond individual circumstance. As I prepared for sleep in what would be my final night in the ACI, temporary living quarters before moving into the completed main suite, I returned to Elise's email, rereading her words about bridges where gaps had existed. Perhaps that was the most appropriate metaphor for what had emerged from my journey. Not monuments to personal achievement or testimonials to overcoming adversity, but connections between isolated experiences, spanning divides that too often leave individuals facing difficult passages alone. The warehouse lights dimmed automatically as I set my phone aside, energy-efficient systems responding to both programmed schedules and occupancy patterns. In the quiet darkness, I listened to the building settling, the subtle sounds of a structure, both honoring its history and embracing its renewed purpose. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. The journey would continue through terrains both familiar and unexpected. But the foundation had been established not on shifting reactions to circumstances, but on consistent alignment with core values: integrity, responsibility, compassion, and the courage to create, rather than merely respond. The ripples would continue, expanding, reaching shores I might never personally witness, and in that ongoing impact, the lives touched, the systems improved, the possibilities expanded, lay perhaps the most meaningful transformation of all. From someone defined by what had been withheld to someone characterized by what could be offered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.